Hey Stephanie, what's up?
Hey, how are you?
Good. Hey, can you make me co-host so I can grab the screen?
Sure can. Absolutely. All right, I got the recording going. So, Dr. Hetty, whenever you'd like to get us started, that sounds great.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this presentation on lit reviews. Thanks for the invite from Cedar. Big shout out to Cedar. They do awesome stuff in our college. Couldn't get by without them. So we really appreciate you setting this up and everything else you do. If you don't know, they can help with research. It can help with writing manuscripts. It can help with poster presentations, printing the posters, designing the posters. So reach out to them. Awesome resource that we have that not a whole lot of universities have, especially housed right within the College of Ed. So thanks to Cedar. I know a lot of you. Some of you I don't know. My name is Benjamin Hetty. I'm an associate professor here at OU in the Department of Educational Psychology. And specifically, I'm in the Learning Sciences program. So I study learning, motivation, engagement, something called transformative experience. I work with first generation college students, high school students, middle school students, kind of do all of that. So if you're interested in motivation at all and you want to chat about it for your research, for yourself, send me an email. Happy to talk to you about it. What we're here to talk about today is how to write literature reviews. Just a pun on words, but what that means is how do you write a good literature review? They're so important, whether you're writing it for your dissertation, whether you're writing it for a manuscript. It's actually something that I just recommend writing in general. I'll talk about that in a little bit. If you have nothing to write on, why not write a little bit on a lit review? It'll come in handy in a lot of different ways that we'll discuss. Please hold your questions for the end, and we'll spend a good amount of time having questions because I'll go through this presentation pretty quick. But let's get into it. How do you write a good literature review? What's the point? Why even write a lit review? It's a good question. Well, there's a lot of points. First, it's a great way to get to know the literature. So if you come into grad school, you're really interested in something, do a lit review. It's the best way to get to know the field. Okay, you might know a lot about something, but you can't just go off anecdotal experience and your own knowledge. You have to dig into the literature, find out what's out there. That's the best way to get to know a literature. The second point is synthesizing literature. And this is really important. Okay, what all is out there? For example, I sent you an article. Don't worry about if you didn't read it beforehand. No big deal at all. If you did read it and have questions, ask me after the presentation. But the article was all about interest. Okay. It's really important to synthesize across literature because there's a lot of stuff out there that might be different. So interest, there's so many different ways to define interest. And we study interest in educational psychology, learning sciences. What I'm in, they study interest in social psychology. They study it in human resources. They study it in business, right? And so it allows you to synthesize across literature that you might not read in your coursework. And then finally, and most importantly, allows you to find gap in the literature. Finding a gap in the literature is really important. This is where research gets done. And a really interesting thing that I used to think that I'm sure some of you might think is everything has already been done. Why study anything anymore? Well, that seems like it might be the case on a surface level. But when you do a literature review and you start to synthesize these different ideas, something I'm going to talk about in more depth later, that's where you'll find the little nuances that you can study. The gaps in the literature is where your research will come out of, where your dissertation will come out of, where your whole program of research will come out of. Again, we're going to talk about that in a bit, but that's the point. Why do a literature review? It's a great way to get to know the literature. It's good for synthesizing across the literature, across fields, across subfields in your own field. And it's great to find a gap in the literature so to signal your own program of research. Okay, you get the point. Now, how do you find the literature? That's where you have to start. How do you find the literature? I have a couple suggestions for that. First, chances are there's been something done at least similar to what you're trying to do a literature review on. If this is a literature review leading up to your research study, chances are there's been something done at least close to it. Even if you're in a new area, there's probably been something similar done to it in a different field. So what I recommend doing is finding a published lit review, a systematic review, or a meta-analysis. This is a great place to start because it'll give you a really up-to-date view of the literature in that area. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And it'll help you write the lit review. When I did my dissertation, I got into a newish area for one aspect of my dissertation, which was parental involvement. And I found an amazing systematic review by Erica Patal, a researcher at the University of Southern California. And this helped me to write it. I paraphrased a lot of what she wrote. It helped me find the literature based on her references and her citations in the systematic review. And so it's a good place to start when you're trying to find the literature. Related to that, look at the references section of articles you're reading. That's where you'll find all the related research, right? If you read an article and you're like, wow, this is super interesting, a ton of other interesting stuff to you is going to be in the references section. Or if you're reading the article and somebody makes a really good point, go find that art, and then they use a citation, go find that article from that citation, from that really good point they made, and read that one too. And then finally, or not finally, two more things left, is Google Scholar cited by. You can set up Google Scholar so it runs right through the University of Oklahoma, and it'll pull out all the articles that are available on that topic. You have to go into Google Scholar and set it up through the library. And then when you find an article that's relevant to you, there's a link right underneath it on Google Scholar that says cited by. Click that link. It'll take you to every article that cited that article that's interesting to you. And then you can read all of those to see if they're relevant. And then finally, ResearchGate. Start a ResearchGate account. I have mixed feelings about ResearchGate because it's kind of performative in nature. It puts all the things you've done out there, but it's also a good way to find articles. And sometimes if OU doesn't have access to an article, you can request it from the author on ResearchGate. In addition, it's a good way to get your name out there. When you request an article, the person you requested it from learns your name. The final thing I'd suggest is if you find an article, you really want to read it, but we don't have access to it at our library, you can't find it on Google Scholar, it's not on ResearchGate, email the author. Tell them that you would like a copy. Currency in academia is citations. So they're going to be delighted to send it to you, especially if you cite them in your lit review, in your manuscript, in your dissertation. Okay, that helps them out. So they will be more than happy to send it to you. If they don't send it to you, don't feel bad. They're not ignoring you. They're busy. Send them another email as a reminder a couple weeks later and CC your advisor. It's harder for them to ignore an email when your advisor's on there as well. Again, they're not being rude. They're just busy. An email from somebody they don't know might be low priority. If you put somebody they know CC'd on that email, they're more likely to send it to you. So that's how you find the literature. Okay, you found it. Now, how the heck do you manage this all? It can be a big task. There is a ton of literature out there. I have a system for managing it. Okay, what I like to do is create a table in Word or use an Excel spreadsheet. I actually tend to use an Excel spreadsheet. And every time I read something, I put a citation of the article right here, just so I can pull it, put it into my manuscript or dissertation, put it into a ref manager. And then I say the aims and the goals. What are the aims and the goals? The research questions of the article. Or they'll straight up say the aims or goals, or they might give you hypotheses. Sometimes you got to dig a little deeper than that, but you want to have your aims and goals in there. You want to put the methods, who are the participants, what were the procedures, what were the analyses. You can put all that here. That's going to be helpful. I'm going to describe in a minute how it's going to be helpful. When you're writing a lit review, you want to synthesize across and say what different things people did or what similar things they did. You're going to put that here in the methods. What were their findings? I recommend straight up pulling their statistical statements or qualitative quotes straight out and putting it into the findings. Pull out the p-value, also pull out the effect size. P-value tip, a p-value is meaningless without an effect size. So pull that out, put it into the finding sections. Next, the implications. Why does it matter? Go into their discussion, look into their discussion. They should have a theoretical implications section and or a practical implications sections or a future direction section. Pull stuff out and put it in there that's interesting to you. The next one is quotes. Okay, so you're reading something online and you highlight it, right? The highlight function, or maybe you're a paper person, you print it out and you highlight it. That's what you throw in your quotes. If it's super relevant, why? Because you can then go and throw it in your manuscript or your lit review, and you can put in the quotes and throw in a citation and page number. You can paraphrase, but it's right here. Because think about it: when you're reading an article, you might highlight a ton of stuff. It's going to take you forever to go back and flip through and or scroll through and try to find what you actually want to quote. Here you can pull one or two of what you think are the most interesting quotes and then use them later in your lit review. And whatever you do, don't just read it and then exit out and never look at it again, because that's not the way long-term memory works. You can't read something and then remember it. I don't even remember what I ate for breakfast this morning. So have a better way to remember those quotes by throwing it in to this manager, and then you can pull it out later for your lit review. And then finally, when you're reading through and something jumps out to you, a citation, pull it out and put it in this references. That'll let you know what to read next. So every time you're bored and you can do a little bit of work, you can open up your manager and you can look at other references. You can pick one and that's the next article you read. And so this is a great way to keep track of what you're reading, keep track of relevant stuff, keep track of stuff you want to quote, and really get to know the literature. This is what I put into the table. I tweeted this out. If you want to follow my Twitter, Benjamin, at Benjamin Heddy on Twitter, I tweet a bunch of stuff related to this, and a bunch of people responded and said other things they like to put in these types of tables. I'm not the one who created this. So play around with it. What types of things do you like in there? What types of things don't work for you, and make it work for you. But this is what I personally use. Okay, so now you know how to find the literature, you know how to manage it. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts. What does a lit review include? So what does it include? An introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Of course, it's way more complex than that. So let's get into each one separately. So the nuts and bolts of the intro. In my opinion, I think an intro has a simple equation with 3 components, 3 paragraphs even. Not everybody agrees with me. Forewarning, not everybody agrees with me. But I think it has a simple equation of 3 paragraphs. And what are those paragraphs? The first thing you do is build the importance. Paragraph 1, your thesis statement. What is the whole point here? Okay. I sent you an article on engagement and interest in college engineering students. What's the importance? Students drop out of engineering at an alarming rate. Retention is super low. Okay, that's a problem because engineering jobs provide high-paying jobs, social and financial mobility, especially for students of color. So here you can build the importance, right? Paragraph 2, describe your aims and goals. Okay, why are you writing this beyond the importance? What are you doing? What are you trying to say? In that manuscript, my lit review was trying to say my aims and goals are I want to study the factors that influence engagement and interest in undergraduate engineering. Okay, those are my aims and goals. A couple more in there. And then paragraph 3, provide a roadmap for the review. For a roadmap, by this I mean state exactly what you're going to say in the following. Okay, in this literature review, I'm going to define the topics of engagement and interest. I'm going to synthesize the relationship between these constructs. I'm going to talk about what existing research has already done. And then I'm going to talk about a research study that I ran to explore the relationship between these variables. So this is really important. The roadmap should not say, I'm going to describe the literature, then I'm going to describe a research study, then I'm going to include a discussion where I talk about the topics, and then I'm going to have a conclusion. Every manuscript does that, right? More specific. Your roadmap should say exactly what you're doing. I'm going to define and synthesize engagement and interest. Then I'm going to describe a research study where I investigated undergraduate and engineering students' interest in engagement with an intervention to facilitate engagement. And then I'm going to talk about the theoretical and practical implications, which are retaining students in engineering by facilitating interest and engagement, right? And so I say exactly what I'm doing, not too general, because every manuscript does that, okay? Nuts and bolts on the body. Okay, this is the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the lit review. Okay, the intro. I like a good lit review. You say what you're gonna say, you say it, and then you say what you said, right? This is where you say it. This is where you build your argument. And it can include several components. Let's discuss a few. The first thing you want to do is define your constructs. Okay. Explicitly define it. You also need to at least give a shout out to many different ways that it's probably been defined. For example, interest, right? That's the manuscript I sent you. Interest could be willingness to re-engage with the topic. It could be intrinsic motivation. It could be value. It could be something that's contextual in nature. It could be something more dispositional. It could be situational interest. It could be individual interest. It could be interest development. There's even a construct called interestingness that's a little bit different. So the point is, here you want to, across the fields and across the subfields in your own field, talk about, or at least give a shout out to the many different ways it's been defined. And then you want to state how you define it specifically, right? Don't leave that part out. You can't just say, here's how it's been defined. Then you got to say how you define it, because that's going to be crazy important for the rest of the lit review, including the theoretical framework that it's positioned within. For example, I define interest as willingness to re-engage with the concept. I define interest development, Heidi and Reniger's 4-phase model of interest development, which has triggered and maintained situational interest and emerging well-developed individual interest. That's how I define it, right? The next thing you want to do is describe the relationships between your constructs. So I say, here's interest, here's engagement, here's how other people define it, here's how I define it. Now here's how they relate according to previous research with citations. Okay, so-and-so showed that interest leads to engagement, and then the more you engage, the more interest develops, and that engagement can lead to the development of interest from situational to individual. So says Heidi and Reniger, so says Harakevich, so says Ainley, so says DeLeon Gray, so says a lot of different great researchers who you cite in there, okay? So you're describing the relationship between the constructs, describing how the constructs interact to influence other outcomes, okay? Next, describe the methods, including participants, instruments, procedures, and analyses. Why does this matter? Some studies explore undergraduate students. Some studies explore graduate students, high school students, middle school students, the general public, workplace engineers, right? If we're talking about engineering education. So I can't just say engagement leads to interest in engineering. That's 7 different contexts. It leads to, I personally know from the research I've done and the literature I've reviewed, that the engagement leads to interest in undergraduate engineering. It doesn't always actually in K through 12, especially middle school. Okay, so you have to say the different contexts that it's been conducted within, what's different between them, what different instruments have been used. Are they mostly surveys? Are they mostly physiological? Are they more qualitative interviews? What procedures have been used to study this? What analyses have been done? Is it mostly qualitative? Is it mostly quant? If it's quant, is it mostly survey or inferential statistics, or do you do more advanced statistical analyses like structural equation modeling? You see what's happening? What's happening is you're finding a nuance. By doing a literature review, you're finding the nuances, the little gaps in the literature by doing these things. Okay, most of the research has been with undergraduate students, and there's been very little with graduate students, right? So boom, there's a gap in the literature. By doing a literature review and synthesizing across these topics in the body of the literature review, it's allowing you to recognize where the gaps are. Most people have only done survey methods, okay? Boom, there's a gap in the literature. Better do some qualitative interviews. Better do some physiological instrumentation like eye tracking and whatnot. Analyses, mostly it's been quantitative inferential statistics, gap in the literature, structural equation modeling, qualitative interviews, right? So by doing these things, you're finding the gaps in the literature. What have been the outcomes? Okay, interest leads to achievement. That's been shown really well. What hasn't been shown is how it leads, or how it might lead to identification with engineering. That could be the problem. They're not identifying with engineering, and so they're dropping out. You just found that by synthesizing the outcomes in the literature. You found the gap, maybe. You got to study it first, right? You found what you think might be the gap. What do they say are the implications? You can find that in the theoretical, practical implications and future directions. And guess what? By doing that, it shows you where gaps in the literature are. Where do the most up-to-date research studies, what do they say are the future directions? Run that study. That's a gap that they're pointing out for you. And the next thing is what's probably most often missing from lit reviews: critiquing the literature. People generally don't do this because maybe they feel bad. Don't feel bad. This is science, right? The whole point is to critique the literature. The researchers who you critique aren't going to feel bad about it. They're going to say, yes, you're correct. Thank you. Please do that study and let's figure this out. A place that you can find critiques, a good practice to find critiques, look in the limitation section of every article. There should be a limitation section. That's them critiquing themselves. Okay. And critiques are the final point gaps. Okay. When you critique something, you're saying there's a gap here. There's a problem that we still haven't found yet. And that's your future direction for research. That's your research study. That's your dissertation. That's where it's at, the critiques and the gaps. Okay. And don't be afraid to critique and don't leave it out of a dissertation lit review. That's the whole point. Even if the literature you're reading, that person's on your dissertation committee, go after it. Now be nice about it. For gosh sakes, don't say they did this crappy study, right? Instead, just say they did, one missing component could be this. That's not rude. That's pointing out what they already know. They know that. You're going to say there is a limitation. They're going to say, yeah, I totally agree. Please run that study. Okay. And then nuts and bolts, the conclusion. This one's a little more straightforward. In a conclusion, summarize the main points. And then it's a call to action. That's the whole point of a lit review. What should we do now? Right? This could be, if this is a manuscript lit review, this could be your research questions. Like, hey, I just wrote this big lit review where I synthesized across these main points. I found these gaps in the literature and we need to study it. Okay, I have these questions now. And guess what? Here's my method section that I use to study these questions. Or maybe it's just a lit review and you're saying future research should explore this. Here's themes that I found when I synthesized across the definitions, the outcomes, the methods, the implications. Okay. That's your call to action. You synthesized, you found themes of gaps and critiques, and we need to do something about it because it's really important. Engineering students, in my example of the article I sent, engineering students are dropping out at an alarming rate, could be having a negative influence on their lives. Let's do something about it. Okay. Cool. Now, how do we write the thing? Right? Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Hetty. Now, tell me how to write it. That's the important part. How do you actually write it? Well, as Rihanna said in her song, you got to read. Okay, she didn't say that. She said work. But it's the same idea. You got to read on a schedule. Okay, don't just say you're going to read. We're all busy. We won't have time to read. Okay, you got to put it on your schedule. Every Monday and Wednesday and Friday from 1 to 2, you're going to read. Okay, put it into your phone, put it into your computer. Okay, and when somebody emails you and says, hey, can you meet Friday from 1 to 2? You say, nope, I got another meeting. Okay, they don't need to know that it's with yourself to read an article, but it is super important. The next thing is write. On a schedule, put it into your phone every Monday, every Friday. I like to do chunks. I used to try to write every day, but then it falls off and then you feel bad about yourself. So instead I switched and I do chunks of writing every Friday from 2 to 5, right? I write and I put it in my phone. If somebody says, hey, can you meet Friday between at 3 p.m.? I say, nope, got another meeting. Sorry. How about Monday? Right? And then they can't get on your schedule. They can't interrupt your writing schedule. Of course, you really want to meet with them, but you got to get your writing done too. So put it on your schedule. Now, a common question I get is, what if I don't have anything to write? What if I'm early on in my grad school career and I don't have anything to write? That's okay. Read. Okay, this is your chance to read and input things onto your manager that I talked about earlier, how to manage your literature. Or get out a pen and a paper and just write things you know. I actually recommend doing this anyway. Once a week at about 9 in the morning when I get going. I'm not an early bird. That's the earliest I get going. I pull out a pen and a paper, and for 10 minutes, I just write ideas down, never to be used again. Okay. Just it gets my blood flowing. You can do that. You can concept map some stuff, outline some stuff, write a rough draft, or start doing an impromptu literature review. Don't wait until your benchmark lit review due for your dissertation, right? Don't wait to write a manuscript. If you're interested in something, just start writing a lit review, okay? Read an article, write a summary of it. Okay, so you've done the literature review. You have something to write. Do you just jump into it? I don't recommend that. Sometimes I do. Sometimes it's a gross term, excuse me. Sometimes I word vomit onto the paper, and that can be a way to get started writing. But more lately, I like to map out my ideas instead. Concept map your ideas, right? You just did this synthesis of the research where you found gaps in the literature. Put those gaps on your paper. Put lines between them. Say how they're related. Say what's missing. Okay, put those themes together. Throw your citations on the map so you know how to theme it in your paper. After you've concept mapped, do an outline. Okay, don't just start writing. Do an outline and outline the intro, outline the body. In your outline, it should just be words, okay, with citations behind them. Always throw your citations in there because it's going to be so much easier later to work them in to the paragraphs. Then develop those words out into sentences, okay? I like to start with the thesis sentences. What's the main point of every paragraph that I want in my manuscript? And then I fill in the details around that main point. Okay. And when you fill out those details, that's you turning your sentences into paragraphs. Next, seek feedback. Pick somebody who will give you nice but critical feedback. Okay. If somebody sends it back to you and say, cool, looks good, that doesn't help you at all. Maybe it helps your self-esteem a little bit, but it doesn't help you develop your ideas. It doesn't help you improve your lit review. You want somebody who will mark it up. I have somebody, a friend of mine, who I can send it to, and she will tear it apart. Okay. And I never get mad at her. I appreciate it every time because it helps me develop my ideas. So seek feedback and then rewrite. It's part of the process. Every time I write a first draft, it sucks. Every time. That's how it works. Okay. So send it to somebody, let them give you critical feedback, and then improve it. That's how you have a good lit review. That's how you have a good study. Next, what are the qualities of a good lit review? Okay, this is some important ideas. First, it should be concise. Here's what you don't want to do. This is a most common mistake. And by the way, this is a mistake I made a ton when I first started writing academically. Don't say, these people did this, and there was 242 students, and they were at a Midwest university, and they ran this analysis, and then they found this, and here's the implications. Next study, they did this. Okay, you don't want that in your lit review, okay? Instead, what you want to do is synthesize crossed. What you want to do is say, research has been done in undergraduate engineering, cite. Researchers have found that you can develop interest by facilitating engagement, cite. Okay. These different methods has been used to facilitate engagement, cite. I'm going to focus on this particular one, cite. then you can go into that one in detail. But we don't need a list of everything that's ever been done. Instead, we want to see synthesize across, really concise. The next thing is to be clear. Be clear. And what I mean by that is there should be a rationale to move from point to point. Okay, so-and-so found this. And so here's a gap in the literature because of this, right? Be really clear. Also, you want to be clear if it's a systematic review, a meta-analysis, be really clear about how you did your review. Where did you find stuff? What were your search terms? Okay, how did you manage your literature? You got to be really clear about that stuff. C number 3, be critical. Okay, don't be afraid to be critical. That's the whole point. Promise, no feelings hurt. Be critical. That's where you find the gaps in the literature. Number 4, be convincing. And by that, I mean provide evidence. Okay, your citations, previous research, your own pilot studies, be convincing. And then finally, be contributive. What does that mean? What are you going to contribute? The end of your lit review, remember, should be that call to action. What are you contributing? You found a gap in the literature and you're describing this lit review to say what that gap is. And then, hey, now I'm doing this dissertation because I found this gap, right? Okay, final thoughts. Have fun. Seriously. No, seriously, have fun. I know that sounds dumb, okay? A lit review can suck. It's hard. But if you're doing a lit review on a topic, I hope you like it. If you don't like it, it's not going to be very fun. So pick something you want to research that speaks to you. Me search, right? Research be a lot of the times is me search because it's something near and dear to you. So if you don't have fun, try to have interest in the topic you're exploring. Okay, so I didn't come up with all of this on my own. Here are a ton of resources for how to write lit reviews. The first one, Raul Pacheco Vega, has a website and it's incredible on how to write lit reviews. Just so many resources. Dig into that. I sent this presentation to Stephanie. She's going to send it all around to you. And then I included articles in here on how to write lit reviews. I also got a Google Doc on how how a professor at a different university grades lit reviews. He shared his rubric with me. Dig into all this stuff because it is crazy useful. And then thank you very much. What questions do y'all have for me?
Dr. Hetty, this is Wendy Mitchell, and can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is about quality of resources that you use, particularly about age, and also the area that I'm interested in. I'm finding a lot of like dissertations that have been written. So are dissertations okay to use as references? Do you want something more, I don't know, researchy? I don't know. Could you talk about that a little?
Absolutely. So age and quality in dissertation, it's a really good question. For age, I like to get into all of it. There's a lot of really important older seminal stuff, but what you can't ignore is the more recent stuff. So I will dig into some older stuff that everybody seems to cite. If you go to Google Scholar and there's like 1,000 citations for something, probably a good chance they're citing it for a reason. That's usually the case. It's not always the case, but it's usually the case. And then I like to go to cited by and then change the search terms for the last 10 years. And then I'll say who in the last 10 years has cited this really important thing that everybody cites. And that can be a really good way to search for more recent stuff, because you're 100% right, Wendy. You really want to get the recent research that has been done on it, because that's where you're going to find the nuance, what's been really done recently on the gaps. Okay, so you want to get onto that newer stuff. And then quality is interesting. So quality can take a lot of different forms. And I like to think that everything is of use. Okay, I've run some studies that I'm not super proud of because I made mistakes, but then I publish them anyway. And then and then I'm just super honest. In my limitations, I'm like, look, I made some mistakes in collecting this data. Here's where I screwed up. If you replicate this study, or if you're citing this, just cite it with caution. But as long as people are honest, that's quality to me in their research. And so I would think less about quality and look at their limitations, see what they're pointing out, and then judge for yourself how useful it is for you. And then finally, dissertations are fine. A lot of people, in fact, more people than not, don't go into academia. They go into industry, and it doesn't matter if they publish their dissertation, right? And by the way, industry jobs are amazing. There's nothing wrong with them. And I even suggest them for a lot of people because they have a ton of benefits that academia doesn't. And so a lot of those people, though, they don't want to publish their dissertations. They're moving on with their life. They got what they needed. And so, yeah, there's a ton of good research and dissertations, just like I pointed out with the quality. Just read it, look for the limitation section, see what they say, cite that stuff with confidence. I think it can be really useful. Any follow-up questions, Wendy, or did I answer your question? I'll take the thumbs up.
No, you did it. You got it. Yeah.
Okay.
You got it. Thank you.
Got you. Thanks for asking that. Other questions? Okay, a little lesson on wait time. Wait time, appropriate wait time. When you ask a question is somebody who doesn't know it. Can you take a guess? Put in the chat. 7 seconds. Anybody else? 45 seconds, 15. Okay, good guesses. It's at least 20 seconds, at least. Okay, think about it. Somebody asks you a question. When you ask somebody a question, they have to take in the information. They have to encode it. Then they have to store it in their short-term memory. Then they have to grab relevant information from their long-term memory, put it into their short-term memory. Think about how that question relates to what they know, their experiences and knowledge. And then they have to generate a question based on how that incoming information matches or doesn't their existing information that they have in their brain. And that takes at least 20 seconds, could be longer. So embrace the awkward wait time. And I was tap dancing. Anybody got a question now? Okay. If you do have a question, feel free to email me. I'm here as a resource for you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I will share. I've already sent this presentation to Stephanie. She's going to send it around to everybody. It's free to own. You can use it and claim it as your own if you want. And really dig into those resources. I didn't come up with this stuff on my own. Stand on the shoulders of giants. Dig into that stuff. You'll find even more nuance and interesting things in that. You're welcome, everybody. Have a great weekend. Have a great rest of your summer, and email me at any time. OU pays me, you pay OU, so I'm here for you to help you with anything you might need.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Hetty.
Yep. Take care.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.